You say men are taller than women. Most people know what that means, right? On average. Like, no, if you say men are taller than women, no one in their right mind thinks it means every man is taller than every woman, right?
Yeah.
No one thinks that. They know that means mostly. So most of the people over 6 foot are male. The average man is taller than 2/3 of women, or whatever it is, right? So there's right? And that's what most sex differences are like. They're not completely separate or completely the same. They have overlapping distributions. And so on average, men might be a little bit less likely to cry. That's true. But it doesn't mean that there aren't some very weepy men, some of whom I think you've had on this podcast. Right? And who knows where this conversation's going, right? Or some women who are less likely to. And we could take in aggression, we could take in risk-taking, we could take in sex drive, we could take in competitiveness, and we could take in more interest in things rather than people, and put all of those on this sort of distribution and just say, look, we can accept there are differences on average, ask if they really matter, and in what way, and then never use that as a way to discriminate against an individual.
So are men and women different?
On average, yeah.
And in what ways are they different that are pertinent to this conversation? When we talk about, it's really about societal roles and gender roles that I'm getting to here, because when we talk about the changes that have happened, and also when we get to the heart of what a man's script should be, there must be clues in how we are different, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. The way I think about this is that if there are these differences on average in, say, risk-taking.
Yeah, because men are the ones that are, I saw the stats, it's like 90% of men are, 90% of people that have like gambling addictions, for example, are men.
Yeah. So it definitely opens up all kinds, so that there's, let's take on average boys and men, somewhat more likely to take risks, right? So let's take that as an example. Like, does it matter? Well, it does matter in some negative ways, because you just identified, look, there's an addiction issue. There's also like teenage boys, like twice as likely to die as teenage girls from risk-taking activity by and large, from car crashes or accidents, much more likely to drown, all these kinds of things, right? Because they're just taking more risks, right? And so that aspect of kind of risk-taking, and especially if the risks involve somebody else's life or well-being, obviously that's a problem. But if the risk-taking means that, say, they're on average a little bit more likely to kind of take a risk in business, right? Or they're more likely to sign up to be a smoke jumper in the US. Do you know what a smoke jumper is?
No idea.
You're going to love this.
What is it?
A smoke jumper is someone, we have these wildfires out in the kind of west of the US.
Yeah.
Right, in California and places like that, in very remote places. Sometimes the only way to fight the fire is to parachute people into the middle of the fire, or just close to the fire, in the middle of nowhere, out of a plane. So these are people who, for a living, parachute out of perfectly serviceable aeroplanes into a raging inferno and stay there for as many days as necessary to try and fight the fire. Incredibly dangerous. And it's almost all men. Okay. It's hard for me to imagine a world where it wouldn't be mostly men selecting into that occupation, because it's very high risk, right? And you could think of others. Is that okay? Probably, right? You don't want to exclude anybody, but you're also not going to freak out that one's not kind of 50-50. And you're also going to say, well, that's good. Mm-hmm. And on the risk take, actually, I think you'll be interested in it. I'd like to get your reaction to this, because I was very interested to discover that this is based on one study, to be clear, but I liked the study, that companies that are led by women, as in CEO and CFO, both women, are a bit less likely to go bankrupt than ones run by men.
I knew what you were going to say before you said the stats.
But a little bit less profitable.
So, I knew what you were going to say before you said the stats, because my experience has been that exactly kind of what you described, in the sense that the CEO of my company now is a woman, and the CEO of my group of companies is a woman. Mm-hmm. And in my experience, men have a higher risk appetite as it relates to company finances, typically, a little bit more, prone to risk. And so, for me, the real important thing has been combining that set of perspectives, so we get the balance.
Exactly. So people could, I think you've drawn the right conclusion from your own experience, which is it's like some people look at that data, right? I'll be unfair to, but they'd say, well, of course, look at these profitable companies led by men, these entrepreneurial risk-taking men. That's why men have to be running all the companies, right? And these women, they're just too safetyism. They're just too scaredy cat, right, for capitalism, right? So let's have men. And the other view would be like, hey, look at all these women-led companies that don't go under as often, don't go bankrupt. Sure, they're a bit less profitable, but they're less risky. So we should have women running companies. Or your conclusion, which is, given that there's probably likely benefits to both sides of that, and again, recognizing it's not all women and all men, maybe we should have diverse leadership teams. That seems to me to be the right conclusion from that. But the conclusion is itself, the arguments for gender diversity are based on the assumption there must be some differences.
Yeah.
If there weren't differences, why on earth would we care about gender diversity, right? If we don't 100%. Think that women and men are bringing something different to the party, not just because of their life experience, but it's like something else a bit different, but risk-taking, competition, etc. If we didn't think that mattered, then we wouldn't care how many board members were women. But we do care about that, quite rightly, because we presume that actually there are some differences between men and women. And so sometimes the idea that there are differences between men and women is seen as a conservative idea, but weirdly it underpins a lot of the progressive movements for gender diversity.
It's so true. It's so very true. And this is why it is difficult to talk about the differences between men and women at a physiological level without it appearing to be like inherently sexist, because it's not to say that either is better or worse. It's just to say that there's differences. And I think it goes back to what I was saying, to understand the script for male, to fill in that question mark, there must be some clues hidden in our biology. There must be, because I think there is, because I'm trying to, it's interesting I'm 31 years old now, and my girlfriend is 31 years old. And in the way that the world has changed, I'm still trying to figure out if like me holding the door open for her is me being old school and old fashioned and a bit misogynist, or if that's because that's what I want to do and she likes it.
Does she?
Of course she loves it.
That's the big question, right?
Of course. She says,
presumably you wouldn't still be together.
I want to do that, and she loves it. And she will have moments where she turns to me and tells me, she'll thank me for doing things like that, and she'll thank me for the way that I am, and she'll acknowledge that my brain and her brain have two completely different perspectives on the world, and it's the differences that make us work, because I come to everything super logical. How can I fix it, babe? It's like I show up with like a spanner to every problem in our relationship, and she has this much more holistic, she almost has like this sixth emotional sense, and together we like navigate issues really well. But it
does require you to respect those differences and not see the old problem was one was seen as better than the other.
Yeah.
Right. So that kind of with all the caveats about averages and overlapping distribution. So let's agree now that by this point in the conversation, anybody listening to this gets that when we say these things, we're not saying all men or all women, right?
Yeah.
If there are differences, the problem in the past was that, let's say, men were a bit more risk-taking, a bit more competitive, a bit more inclined to kind of rational approaches to problems, that was better.
Yeah.
That's the definition, in my mind, a useful definition of a patriarchy. A patriarchy is one where more typically masculine virtues or attributes are seen as better, right? And you could argue that a matriarchy, were we to have one, would be the other way around. And an equal society isn't one of androgyny. It's one where they're treated as equal value. So we don't say one is better than the other. We say they're different and try and bring them into kind of collaborative and constructive and rather beautiful equality.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.